Welcome to Integral Care and the Integral Care Foundation's Addressing the Rise of Alcohol and Drug Abuse in Uncertain Times. I'm Dr. Kathleen Casey. I serve as the Director of Clinical Innovation and Development for Integral Care. Integral Care is the local mental health and intellectual and developmental disability authority serving Travis County. We've served children, youth, adults living with mental illness, substance use disorder, and intellectual and developmental disabilities for over 50 years. We will be joined by Dr. Rachel Gunner, the Director of the Board for the Integral Care Foundation. The Integral Care Foundation supports and raises funds for the services we're able to provide, and we're incredibly grateful for their help. Rachel will greet at the end of our discussion today and help us round out our discussion. At Integral Care, we do offer services for individuals using alcohol and drugs. We provide treatment in the form of individual and group counseling, as well as connection to services within the community. 2020 has been an incredible time of stress for all of us, and for many, quite traumatic. We're facing a global health crisis, an economic recession, a national awakening of racial injustice, and a call for equity. And the stress, uncertainty, and grief and loss that individuals are experiencing in this time, with all that's going on, it's not uncommon that folks will reach towards drugs and alcohol as a means of regulating their emotions and, in fact, just attempting to cope. We know that the U.S. Drug Council reported that in the first quarter of 2020, that deaths attributable to drug overdose increased 11.5% over last year. Calls to our hotline have increased, and we know from national surveys across the board that individuals are really struggling with maintaining their recovery, and others are falling into addiction. Our aim today is to cover the basics of what are the signs and symptoms that an individual might be experiencing difficulties with their use of substances. We'll discuss the range of treatment and as well as resources. And in fact, we will be posting resources on our website and sending out a list to all our attendees today. I'd like to begin to introduce our panel. We are privileged today to have a panel that comes from a variety of different perspectives on substance abuse and treatment, and a wealth of experience. I'll begin with Joy Rucker. Joy is the Executive Director for the Texas Harm Reduction Coalition. Joy began her work, her professional career in HIV prevention in Boston, and was part of the first outreach team that provided clean needles to individuals who were using intravenous drugs. She also came to the model, as I understand it, of harm reduction through the Corporation for Supported Housing. She and her team developed the first training around harm reduction for supportive housing, and was also a trainer at the national level for the National Harm Reduction Coalition. We're also joined by Linda Rhodes. Linda is a certified peer support specialist and a peer recovery specialist with Communities for Recovery, a wonderful nonprofit here in Austin, a great partner of Integral Care. Linda leads and coordinates all of recovery services and a team of 6 peer recovery specialists within her organization. She's a person in long-term dual recovery and has a deep passion and a special skill for individuals in recovery who are either experiencing homelessness or who have a history of homelessness. And last but not least, we're joined by Dr. John Wynn. Dr. Wynn is an Associate Medical Director with Integral Care. He's an addiction psychiatrist, serving as an affiliate faculty member with both Dell Medical School and Texas A&M's Department of Psychiatry. He is the new director of the Addiction Medicine Fellowship between Dell Medical School and Integral Care, and also is a consulting psychiatrist at UT Health Austin. We're very grateful to all of our panelists and look forward to a rich discussion. Let's start. I will say that we have planned questions for our panel to discuss based on input from registrants and our team. We will reserve the last 10 minutes of our discussion for audience questions. So you'll notice a Q&A box at the bottom of your screen. If you have questions, feel free to type them in. We will attempt to get to as many as possible, but we likely won't. What we've committed to doing is answering every question, and in fact, if it's not too personal, we won't post private questions, but for all the other Q&A, our panelists have committed to providing respective answers, and we will post that to our audience members. I also want to remind everybody that this is being recorded, and we are also live streaming on Facebook. So let's launch into our discussion. First, Dr. Nguyen, if you would start us off, what is substance use disorder? How would one define that?
Thank you, Kathleen. When talking about substance use disorders, it can be helpful to think of substance use along a continuum. On one end, you have experimental and social substance use, which is what practically everyone experiences growing up. And then for some people, that can become unhealthy or at-risk use. And then for other people, that can progress to self-medication, or finally to a more severe substance use disorder or addiction, where substance use has negatively impacted someone's physical health, their mental health, their relationships, their ability to hold a job or care for their loved ones, and their overall functioning.
Thank you. So pandemic or no pandemic, how would you recognize what might be substance use that's becoming unhealthy or something to be concerned about? Joy, would you mind starting us off on what are the signs and symptoms that someone's substance use could be becoming problematic?
Sure. Hello, everyone. Just to correct, where I'm from the Texas Harm Reduction Alliance, not the coalition. So I just want to make that distinction. I would say that when people start having problems showing up to their day-to-day functions in the way that they had been previously, calling out sick, not able to pay bills, start borrowing money, just really kind of disappearing from their life in a way that people aren't accustomed to. I think that starts, for me anyway, that starts to signal something has changed, what's going on. And it's worth having a conversation about it, especially if people can't show up for work and they have been consistent previous to that, or they start borrowing money. That's generally a sign. And then another I would say is if people start losing weight or physically they start to look different. I would say that generally I would start asking questions.
Linda, as a peer recovery specialist, within your work, what are the signs and symptoms that you notice and think our audience would benefit from understanding?
Well, I mirror some of Joy's input on what she sees when we start having tail signs of someone that's in a struggle or might have had a recurrence. And I know for me, the most obvious is physical appearance. If somebody's personal hygiene starts going by the wayside, their overall appearance is unhealthy, or there's a great amount of weight loss in a short amount of time. I know all of those things stand out to me. When there's an increased dysfunction in the family or an inability to have relationships or maintain any kind of healthy relationships are signaling to me that somebody's in a struggle. I think poor boundaries and poor decision making and a loss of their recovery capital, like their housing or their job, those sort of things. When we see a loss in their recovery capital happening, I do know that someone's in a struggle. I know for me, I had a peer that I worked with for many years. He came out of incarceration and rejoined society, worked really, really hard to establish a strong recovery program for himself, and secured work and got stable housing, re-engaged with his family. And we met on a regular basis and we saw each other weekly and we're on the phone. And at some point he started missing his appointments or being late, no longer punctual, or calling to reschedule. And shortly after that, I saw him lose his job, which led to eviction, and then his relationship with his family dissolved. And at this time, he completely withdrew from his services. And it was a high sign to me, obviously, that he was in a struggle. And his phone has since then been cut off, and we have no means of communicating or connecting with him. So I think that an obvious sign is the physical things that start happening when somebody's in a struggle. And I think the subtle telltale is when someone starts withdrawing or isolating. I think that both of those are strong.
Thank you for that. Dr. Nguyen, we know that recovery looks different for different people. There's no one size fits all. Could you describe sort of the spectrum of treatment interventions and what, in your experience and from the evidence, helps to engage somebody in those respective treatments?
Sure, I think it is important to emphasize that one size does not fit all. And really, the treatment selection should be based on what an individual feels would be helpful to them and what they feel ready to try out. And that may not always match what we want for someone ourselves. So for some people, that could mean stopping all substances. And for other people, it could mean just trying to reduce how much they use or trying to reduce the impact that it has on their health. In terms of treatments, treatment can range anywhere from individual therapy to group therapy to mutual help and peer support, with focus, and those forms of therapy and group support focus on coping strategies, stress management, setting goals, maintaining social connection, spirituality, and emotional support. And then there's also medication that can help for cravings and withdrawal, as well as medication that can help with underlying mental health conditions such as anxiety or depression or problems with sleep. And then there's various interventions to reduce the harms associated with substance use, such as interventions to reduce the rates of overdose or infections. It's also important to recognize that most treatment actually does not occur in inpatient or residential facilities. While important, a lot of treatment, and maybe most treatment, occurs in counselors' offices, in group rooms, and in the community.
Joy, your organization focuses on harm reduction as an approach. At a high level, could you explain what harm reduction is and ways that you've experienced it to be successful?
Sure. Well, we look at harm reduction as what when people are using, and this isn't for people that are struggling with recovery, this is people that are committed to using. They have not made that decision to change their using to abstinence, is what is the most harmful thing in your life related to your drug use? And then we start to make a plan on how to reduce that. And so with the person, we will come up with strategies to reduce that harm. And it's really how the person identifies it. I might see it as clear as day that the reason why you're having so many problems in your life is because you're using. But that might not be what they identify. They might identify that I need to be employed. And so that's where I'm going to start the conversation is, okay, what do we need to do to help you to become employed? And then you have that conversation about all that goes into being employed and showing up for work, and what kind of work do you want to do? Are they going to take urinalysis? Oh, if they are, will you be able to pass that? So then people get to decide what consequences they want to continue to pay or change. And I think that harm reduction is a continuum on the, it's a continuum on the road to recovery. Abstinence is the ultimate harm reduction strategy. But for people that cannot make that transition as quickly as other people, we still have to figure out how to provide those folks with services so that they can stay alive. And so harm reduction is really looking at your health, the quality of your life, and can we start addressing that? And then hopefully at some point, you might decide your values have changed and you want to live a different kind of life. And if not, you're still eligible to receive whatever services are available for you and what you need.
Great. So you're engaging them where they're at and identifying what is motivating them in their life, working with them respectfully to provide assistance.
And, you know, with harm reduction, we believe that the person is the expert. You know, they're the expert on what they're going to do and what they're not going to do. And so we don't take the approach that we know what's better for someone in their life than they do. So we don't start with, oh, let's create a recovery plan for you. It's like, what is it that you want to identify and work on and move from there? Because my experience has been, if you start creating a recovery plan for people without their input, then it's your plan, it's not their plan, and they're not going to be as committed to it. So that's why we use a harm reduction approach, and some of examples of harm reduction, of course, are syringe exchange, overdose prevention, seat belts, really practical tools for a very complicated situation, I would say.
Excellent. Linda, what is the role of a peer in this treatment approach?
Well, I know the peer perspective is so important in the recovery movement in general. What I have is to bring my lived experience to the table and the conversation. And as a recovery support specialist, the organization that I work for supports multiple pathways, including harm reduction. And as Joyce said, we meet people where they're at. I'm not here to recruit people into recovery or direct somebody's into some specific recovery programming. What I want to do is find out what's important to somebody and where it is that they're wanting to get to, and help them come up with some goals in order to accomplish that. And that can be as small as getting a pair of socks or a new pair of shoes, up to finding a house or a job. And sometimes those tiny goals are what we need in order to allow us to move forward to be able to be successful with some of our larger goals. So yeah, as a recovery support specialist, I have recognized that there is no cookie cutter recovery. It looks different for everybody. Everybody's journey and everybody's path is just their own, and it's it's self-directed. So yeah, that's what I have come to see. And I think the peer approach, again, is it's somebody that's been there, that has lived experience. I also model my behavior to the people that I coach. That they can see that I have come out on the other side of my substance use disorder, and am a good example for what it can look like.
Right. We know how powerful it is for someone to know that they're not alone and that treatment is effective. And peer recovery specialists and are living, breathing examples of that. You yourself and your organization make that incredible contribution. Considering our current situation of quarantine and isolation, people who are struggling with substances and their own recovery, if they've already been in recovery, things are different. Joy, in your experience with your organization, what are you seeing that's different and perhaps more challenging?
I think the biggest thing that we're seeing is the isolation and the danger that has created for the folks that we serve, because we, as an overdose prevention strategy, we always tell people not to use alone. And now with COVID, there's a lot of isolation and people are using alone and not connected to their community or even the larger community. So I think isolation is a huge issue for the people that we're seeing. And I think it's a big issue for people in recovery as well. Especially if you're used to going to meetings and being, having that physical hug and seeing people and getting that kind of love. It's tough. Zoom is available, but it's not the same thing. It's not the same thing. So we're seeing that the isolation and overdoses are increasing as a result of COVID.
And Linda, with your work, what are you seeing sort of play out in this time of lack of connection and physical touch?
Well, I learned a long time ago that substance use disorder is a disease of loneliness and isolation. And I believe that sobriety is not what recovery is about. Recovery is about connection. And that's connection with my family, connection with my friends, my community, connection with myself and the world at large. And the COVID has just put a barrier in regards to having that one-on-one, face-to-face connection. Communities for Recovery offers 30+ virtual online meetings, and we are providing recovery coaching via Zoom and over the phone. And those are wonderful options and are great supports to have. But taking out that component of being together in a space and having that one-on-one connection is a huge disadvantage of what's going on right now with the COVID. That's something that I have seen. And I also agree with what Joy said. And a lot of it is when people are isolating like that, there's a for folks that I have worked with, there's a lack of accountability that goes on too, because when I'm by myself, there's really no one to see what I'm doing or how I'm doing. And I think that the use alone is really dangerous in regards to the overdose that we're seeing.
So we do know that we've made a rapid shift. Many, if not most services have shifted to telemedicine in this time to comport with public health guidelines and keeping everybody safe. We've just heard that there's incredible challenges to that. But we also have heard that there are some upsides. Dr. Nguyen, could you speak to your work with telemedicine and perhaps an example of that might illustrate where there's benefits to that type of engagement, that medium?
Sure, absolutely. And I completely agree with Joy and Linda that there's a lot of challenges in helping people stay connected. I think maybe a silver lining, if you will, is the role of telehealth and sort of expansion of that. For some people, it's actually helped to reduce some barriers. So they're able to talk to their doctor or their counselor by phone or video chat. And it's actually helped them to engage more with treatment, and they can worry less about transportation or getting to their appointment or coordinating childcare or their work, where in the past, those kinds of things might have made it too difficult to sustain staying in treatment. So we've seen some lowering of the barriers to accessing doctors and counselors. It's also allowed things that in the past weren't even possible or legal. So for one example that comes to mind is just last week, I was able to meet with someone over the telephone who was in a hospital maternity ward and start her on medication treatment. And in the past, I would not have been able to do that. And more often than not, in those situations, someone might leave the hospital and kind of go about their lives and never really have the chance to engage in treatment. But this allowed us sort of a key moment in time when that person was ready to talk to me and to try something a little bit different. So that was one example where prior to coronavirus, we wouldn't have been able to do that. And so I think the silver lining is that there are other opportunities to keep people in treatment or to engage them in treatment when they otherwise wouldn't have. I think one of the things that we also have to keep in mind, though, is related to health equity. So not everybody has access to technology or telephones. And so one thing that we're always trying to be aware of is making sure that for those people, we're still able to offer them the care and the support that they need.
Excellent point. In terms of the increased access in the medium for those who do have access to the technology, I know at Integral Care, for example, our overall no-show rate has gone down. So in other words, more people are able to attend their appointments and receive care. And we're seeing this especially for the youth population, children and family services. The interface of technology is much more familiar and comfortable to youth, and they're reporting it's less intimidating. So there are those elements that healthcare providers are talking about across the board as potentially sustaining after we move through this pandemic, and certainly as we look to the need to increase substance abuse services. Linda, would you like to speak to your experience with sort of the upside of some of the virtual stuff for some of the folks you've worked with?
Well, what I heard and what has been said is the remover of the barriers like transportation. And I have a peer that has great anxiety going out in public and being in a group setting. And she also had no vehicle or transportation. So having the virtual meetings available and to come basically into her home have allowed her to engage and receive some recovery support where prior to COVID, she was isolated and was not able to interact with other people that were, like-minded and seeking recovery as well. So I think that that's been a huge upswing and a benefit of the COVID. And I think that just having exposure to a larger community and being able to reach more people when we are going out virtually. So yeah, I think that there are some silver linings to the COVID.
So we do know one of the biggest challenges to people seeking treatment is all the myths and associated stigma surrounding substance use disorders. What do people need to know about substance use disorders? Dr. Nguyen, do you want to start us off with what's really important that people sometimes don't understand about the nature of substance use?
Or I think, historically, substance use disorders have been really stigmatized because symptoms of a substance use disorder can look like behaviors that are harmful to oneself or to others. But it's important to recognize that substance use disorder is a brain-based disorder. For someone who chronically uses substances, their brain changes in a way that is different than people who have never had a problem with substances. Someone with a substance use disorder who's active in their addiction, their brain reacts differently and more intensely to certain triggers. And at the same time, their brain may have an impaired ability to control impulses. So even if someone can explain intellectually why doing something might be a bad idea, they might still end up doing it anyways because the urge is too strong or their brain can't hold back the impulse. And then in our society, if you know something's wrong and you do it anyways, you're considered guilty. And in substance use disorder, someone might know something's a bad idea, but they might do it anyways. And so our society tends to assign blame for that kind of behavior. But if you factor in the brain impairments that can be happening, it actually becomes more about being a brain disorder that needs treatment rather than something that should be blamed or punished.
Joy, would you like to speak to some of the myths and stigma and what people should understand about substance use disorders?
Thank you for that explanation, Doc. It's not a moral failing. I think that people who don't understand why people use think that it's really about a moral failing, that all you have to do is this. And, or if you really cared about your family, if you really cared about your job, and the two have absolutely nothing to do with each other. I can care about my job, I can care about my family, I can care about all the things that are important to me, and I can still use and pay those consequences and can't stop. So, and I think the biggest thing for me when I'm working with people is to know that they already feel shame. They're already ashamed of the fact that they continue to use and they cannot stop on their own. And so shaming does not help people to move to a better and more positive place around seeking help. So, that's the biggest thing I would say, is trying to understand that people are already filled with shame. And what they need from other people is just really some understanding and some empathy, that they don't want to be doing what they're doing. They just can't help what they're doing. And so really not having the stigma of shame.
Excellent. Linda, from peer
I
recovery?
think one of the things that I hear is the idea that recovery is linear. And what I've learned from not only my own recovery, but from working with others, that it's just not a linear process. Very seldom does somebody find some sobriety and recovery and just maintain that, solidly throughout. I think often it's a dance of 2 steps forward and maybe a step back and 2 steps forward. And this goes on while we're trying to establish a secure and concrete recovery for myself. And with that being said, I think that ties into recurrence is part of recovery, where reflecting what Joy had said about the shame aspect, I think often when people have a recurrence, it's viewed with shame. They shame themselves, and it's something that I always impart upon the people that I coach, is that we can either take that recurrence and have it be a bad experience, or we can flip the script on that and consider it as a learning lesson. I always say to take what it is that you happened and you learned while you were out off your path and put it in your back pocket and use that as a strength to move forward in your recovery. Frankly, I've been coaching people for many years, and I have never, ever had anybody say that they had a wonderful time when they stepped off their path and, started re-engaging. And most what I hear from people is they couldn't believe how fast things fell apart. So I think having that experience and knowing what we don't want to do and what things might look like is a strength builder for people. So I think that idea that recovery is linear is just doesn't hold true.
So we talked about the context, these challenging times. What can people do to help themselves or somebody else that they care about who may be struggling with substances? Linda, I know you were just speaking so wonderfully. Could you mind leading us off on what can people do?
Well, I know as a person in long-term recovery, unless somebody is wanting to find wellness and wanting to find recovery, that it's just not going to happen. I've heard it been said that it's an inside job, and it has to become from a personal desire and motivation. I know if I was to get sober for my husband or for my child and those sort of things, it's not going to be sustainable. It has to be a conviction that it comes from within. Yeah, that's what I have to say.
Joy, do you have any guidance for those that want to help themselves or others?
Well, I would say that at least talk to someone else about your struggles. I'm a person in long-term recovery as well. And when I was struggling and could not make sense of what was going on in my life as a result of my using, I did talk to other people, trying to get an understanding of what is going on. Why can't I stop this behavior? And I did get some helpful information. I'm not going to say that I took it at that particular time, but it was really helpful information. And I think the biggest thing is don't hide, don't live in secrecy. There's help, there's support. And even if you're not at the place where you want to completely stop using, there are harm reduction services like what we provide. We provide recovery coaching services as well, but on the harm reduction spectrum. So just for me, just know you're not alone. And you're not the first person that's going to have this issue, and you're not unique. We all are struggling in some way or another. And if you are able to at least talk to somebody about what you're struggling with.
I so agree with you, Joy. I know as a peer coach, I work with a number of people that are still engaging and still, in their substance use. And for me, being able to hold a judgment-free, safe space for them, and when somebody is ready, we never know when that switch is going to flip. They know where to come to, and they know a place that they can find that support that they're looking for. At Communities for Recovery, we have a recovery center organization where it's a safe space for people to come to, and that's what I have heard spoken by most individuals that come here, is that they felt safe when they arrived. And so I think for family members and other individuals, why we are trying to help folks that maybe don't want help is just maintaining that safe space for them and allowing a judgment-free interaction.
And I would say for family members, you can look in your local community for family support. The biggest thing is take care of yourself. Understand what your boundaries are and what you're comfortable in supporting. And if you're uncomfortable, don't support that behavior, but really take care of yourself, because with active using and families, everybody is impacted and everybody suffers and everybody gets sick to some degree. So the most important thing for a family member is to take care of yourself and understand what your boundaries are to stay healthy.
Very important.
Thank you for that. Dr. Wynn, we're getting a question for you to perhaps elaborate a little bit on the brain-based sort of neurobiology of addiction and how that can help family members understand better their loved ones' conditions.
Yeah, my hope is that by appreciating it as a brain-based disorder, we can have a little bit more empathy for people struggling with this condition, rather than feeling that they're to blame for it. That's not to say that someone's not responsible for their actions, but that it's different than something that should be blamed or punished. There's different areas of the brain that control impulse control, or different areas of the brain that control cravings and motivations. And heavy chronic substance use just affects those parts of the brain in a way that, for some people really requires lifelong attention to manage. And a lot of treatments are aimed at trying to help with those areas by building coping strategies or building the ability to manage impulses and urges, and ways to heal the brain.
So many of you touched on this, but we're getting some questions related to guidance on what do you do if somebody doesn't want help at this particular time?
Well, I think what I had tried to express before is if somebody doesn't want help, it's not trying to persuade somebody or recruit somebody into recovery. If somebody is not looking for help, then it's just not going to be successful if I am trying to impart upon them some sort of recovery program or to bring them into a certain lifestyle or wellness. And I think from my perspective, if we have somebody that we're wanting to help and that does not want help, it's maintaining that safe space and holding a judgment-free place for them to come when they do want that help. That's what I just personally believe, that if somebody is not wanting help, then they're just not ready. And, you know, sometimes it takes what it takes, and the switch flips at some point sometimes for some people. And yeah, we're all on our own journey, and it just looks different. So allowing people to have that freedom to do what it is that they need to do in order to come to a place of wanting some wellness.
Holding that non-judgmental space for when they're ready. And Joy, you had talked about engaging in what desires an individual may have for their life outside of addiction. That may be a way to begin a discussion.
Right. I think what I've learned is that people that use still have values, and they may have changed over the course of time, but they still have values. And so one of the biggest values that I've encountered and people always care about is their health. Now, how they take care of that might look very differently than how you take care of your health and how I might take care of my health. But that's a value for people. And so for me, if I want to understand or support someone, then I'm going to try and understand what their value system is while they're currently struggling around their use, and trying to support them around that without judgment. It's like, okay, if you're concerned about your health, how can I support you? Would it help if you came over to eat once a week? Are you making sure you have water? Are you making sure you're taking vitamins? So that I'm not condoning their use, but I recognize that they're going to continue to use. But here is how I can support you if you're worried about your health. And let's make a plan around that.
Right. I know, you know, some families really are challenged by this notion of enabling versus being there to support somebody's basic health. That can be an incredible challenge for folks.
I know, you know, the word enabling is really interesting to me, because I think that people have to be comfortable with how they support people in their lives that use. You know, we hear about tough love and that we shouldn't do this, we shouldn't do that. But people have to look at what's the price you're going to pay if you say no. You know, is the price bigger for you personally and emotionally and spiritually if you put your loved one out on the streets, or can you live with that? So I don't, you know, enabling is such a funny word to me, because when I think about enabling and the work that I do and in my family, because I have other people in my family that use, you know, how I define it for me is I can't give you any money. You know, I can't give you any money. I will clothe you, I will feed you. If you need to come and take a shower, get a good night's sleep, all of that is available. But for me personally, if I start giving people that are in my life that are using, for me, that's enabling, you know. But that's my definition. It doesn't have to be that for everybody, but that's what I've finally come to, is that, okay, this is a boundary I cannot cross and live with myself.
Dr. Wynn, did you want to elaborate on any?
Yeah, I think, you know, Joy had mentioned earlier family members taking care of themselves. And I think when you're working with a family member or a loved one with a substance use disorder, it can be really frustrating. You might be angry, you might be really resentful, you might be desperate or really disappointed. And I think taking care of oneself to help manage some of those feelings actually can help you, but it can also help your loved one. Because when I try to help someone while I'm angry at them, it doesn't work so well. But if you can come from a point of real concern about their health and their well-being and a point of caring and compassion, rather than feeling angry or frustrated, that person's much more likely to be receptive to your ideas or to your help.
So we talked about we're going to put a list of all the resources for our audience and others that will tune in because this is being recorded, so those who tune in later. But I wanted to give an opportunity to all of you to provide some suggestions on, in this pandemic right now in our community, where can people find help? Linda, your organization?
Well, like as I mentioned earlier, Communities for Recovery, we do offer peer support, peer coaching, either over Zoom or the phone. We are having people that are going back out into the field, and we're slowly bringing face-to-face recovery meetings back with the safeties in place. We have 30 plus meetings online and events that are being held that people have access to or can have access to. And so I think these are some great ways to find support. There's 12-step meetings that people can engage in. And I think for families, there's Al-Anon, and we, at Communities for Recovery, have family support available as well. We have a family peer coach, and locally, I think that there's some organizations that, you know, especially help people that are experiencing homelessness, such as Trinity Center or Sunrise Church, the Other Ones Foundation, some of Texas Harm Reduction. There's just a multitude of small organizations out there that people can seek help and support from. And I think on the big level, I know that NAMI has a hotline if people have a struggle with mental health, and SAMHSA has a 24-hour hotline as well that's available 365 days a year. And so finding some of the supports that are available by, you know, large organizations is a great option too.
Thank you, Linda. Joy, harm reduction assistance?
At Texas Harm Reduction Alliance, we help people either get on a medicated treatment, or we try to assist them by paying for 5 weeks while we try and help them get sustainable funding. And we also provide overdose prevention medication and information. And I think that if you have a family member or you have a friend, someone you know, that it's very helpful to have Narcan available and understand how to use it, because you can save someone's life. And if you don't have any, you can get in touch with us. We have some. And then we're also posting, I guess, at the end of this on resources, and that there'll be a list for that as well.
Thank you. Dr. Nguyen, real quick, I know we're going to have a list, but Integral Care, what do we offer folks?
Sure. At Integral Care, we provide individual and group counseling, intensive outpatient treatment, opioid treatment, mental health counseling, psychiatric care, crisis services, housing and employment supports. And you can find out more about those by calling our helpline, which is 512-472-HELP to access services.
Well, unfortunately, our time has come to a close. I know we could talk for hours. I want to thank each and every one of you for sharing your depth of experience and expertise and words of words of support and hope to our audience members. We'll now be joined by Rachel Gunner, who's the board of director for the Integral Care Foundation. And thank you to our audience. Rachel? What's a panel discussion without some technological glitch, right? While we're waiting for Rachel to join us, I'll reiterate the work of the Integral Care Foundation in supporting awareness and services for integral care. They serve a vital role in our community and have a special dedication to supporting our efforts in the substance abuse arena. Looks like Rachel might be off mute now. Rachel?
I think I'm off mute, but I don't see myself. So I guess you'll just have to hear me. So my name is Rachel Gunner, and I am, oh, wait a second. I said start my video. Here I am. Good. So again, sorry about the technological problems. My name is Rachel Gunner, and I am privileged to be the president of the board of the Integral Care Foundation, that is the co-host with Integral Care of this really informative forum. And I want to thank all of our very knowledgeable panelists who facilitated such thought-provoking conversation, and to all of you who have joined us today to learn more about substance use. And as you've heard, all aspects of health, mental, emotional, physical, spiritual, relational, all are impacted by substance use. And certainly during stressful times, which are compounded now by COVID, we must pay even more attention to how we, our family, our friends, and our community are coping with daily life. We hope that our presentations have enriched your understanding of substance use and substance use disorder, and have offered some helpful strategies and resources. And as Dr. Casey mentioned, we have recorded these presentations. We will be sending them to you along with the resources that our panelists have provided. And at the end of this forum, we would be very grateful if you would share your opinions by completing a short survey. So again, I thank you all for being with us today. I hope you continue to be safe as you go through your daily lives, and I wish you well and have a good afternoon.